The sun had barely risen over the mountain valley that morning. Mist drifted low between the pine trees, and the sound of the river filled the cold, empty air. Early spring had come to these woods, the kind of morning when breath hung heavy and everything smelled of damp earth and melting snow. Samuel Blake, 63, walked the same trail he had walked for years. A retired wildlife tracker, he still moved with quiet purpose, carrying his old camera and a small notepad in his coat pocket. His cabin stood alone near the forest's edge, a simple wooden place he'd built himself, far from the noise of town. Out here, silence was his company. Most mornings, Samuel checked his traps and photographed animal prints in the mud. He liked the calm of it, the steady rhythm of a life without surprises. But that morning, as he followed the creek's bend, something broke the pattern. Half buried in wet moss and reeds lay a small basket, hand-woven, delicate, almost human in its design. It didn't belong out here. Samuel crouched beside it, brushing away the mud. For a moment he thought it might be some lost camping gear or maybe an abandoned pet. But when he gently peeled back the layer of damp cloth inside, his heart stopped. Lying there, shivering and weak, was a small creature, covered in fine brown fur, breathing faintly. A baby Bigfoot, no bigger than a newborn child. The creature, inside the basket, was unlike anything Samuel had ever seen. Its small body was covered in soft, dark brown fur, matted from the damp. Tiny hands, more human than animal, curled weakly against the woven reeds. Its chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and when Samuel leaned closer, a pair of large, amber eyes blinked open, confused, frightened, yet searching. He froze, his instincts at war with his reason. He'd spent a lifetime tracking bears, elk, and wolves, but this was different. No animal could have built that basket. Someone, or something, had placed it there, and that meant whoever left it behind might come looking. For a long moment Samuel stood there, the cold air biting his face, the sound of rushing water in his ears. Then he did what his heart told him to do. He slipped off his coat, wrapped the trembling creature inside, and carried it back toward his cabin. Inside, he set it near the stove, feeding it a few drops of warm milk from a tin cup. The little thing whimpered, then settled, curling up beside the fire. As the warmth returned, its breathing grew stronger. Samuel watched, still unsure what he was looking at. Its eyes followed his movements carefully, head tilting when he spoke, almost as if it understood. Once it even lifted a hand, clumsy and slow, mimicking his gesture. For the next few days, Samuel kept his secret. He told no one, not the ranger in town, not the neighbor 2 miles down the road. In a world that mocked what it didn't understand, he knew what hunters might do if they heard. So he stayed silent, and took care of it as if it were his own. Over the following week, the little creature grew stronger. The shivers faded, its eyes brightened, and it began to move about with a quiet curiosity that made Samuel smile in spite of himself. He named it Willow, after the tree that bent low over the creek where he'd found it, fragile yet full of life. Willow followed him everywhere, small steps padding softly across the cabin floor, reaching out with gentle fingers to touch his hand. It made low humming sounds when he spoke, as though it understood. At night it curled by the fire, the soft crackle of wood lulling it to sleep. Samuel found himself talking again, telling old stories, the kind he used to share with his late wife when the nights were long and lonely. The cabin, once filled with silence, now carried the sound of breathing, of movement, of something living and trusting. He caught himself watching Willow with the same care a father gives a child, cautious, protective, tender. In its eyes, he saw no monster, only innocence. But every time the wind rose through the pines, Samuel felt a quiet unease. Out here, nothing ever truly disappeared. And somewhere in those dark woods, something was surely looking for what he had found. The days passed quietly, but the woods around Samuel's cabin began to change. It started with the silence and that strange kind of hush that settles over the forest when something big is moving through it. Birds stopped singing. Even the creek seemed to run quieter. One morning, While checking his snares near the tree line, Samuel noticed footprints in the mud, enormous, nearly twice the size of his own boot. The stride was long and steady, too deliberate to be a bear. He crouched down, running a hand along the edge of the print. It was fresh. Whatever had made it had passed by within the hour. Then came the scratches, long, deep grooves etched high into the trunks of pine trees around his cabin. Not random, markings, territorial, a warning or a sign, he couldn't tell which. That night, a distant howl echoed through the valley. It wasn't like a wolf. It carried more weight, more sorrow. The sound made Willow flinch and crawl beneath the table, pressing its hands over its small ears. Samuel knelt beside it, his voice low and steady, but he could feel its heartbeat racing. The next morning he found something new near the creek, a pile of river stones stacked carefully in a circle. It wasn't natural. It was deliberate. He stood there for a long time, staring into the mist. The message was clear. The forest was watching. That night, unable to sleep, Samuel sat by the fire, listening to the wind move through the eaves. When he finally dozed off, a faint sound woke him, a soft melodic cooing from the window. Willow stood there, eyes fixed on the darkness outside, making quiet sounds almost like an answer, as if something out there had called, and it had heard. The storm came without warning. By nightfall, the valley was drowning in rain and wind. Trees bent under the weight of it, their branches scraping against the roof of Samuel's cabin. Thunder rolled over the mountains like cannon fire. Samuel was sitting by the fire when he heard it, a heavy thud outside, then another. At first, he thought it was just a tree falling in the storm. But then came the unmistakable sound of movement, slow, deliberate, too heavy for any man. He reached for his old rifle, not out of fear, but instinct. Through the howling rain, he could sense more than one presence. Shapes moved beyond the tree line, faint in the lightning flashes, tall, broad, shifting shadows 8 to 9 feet high. They didn't rush or charge, they circled, watching, listening. Willow stirred, whimpering at first, then began to cry. A deep, mournful sound that Samuel had never heard before. It pounded the window with its small hands, desperate, calling out into the storm. Samuel knelt, trying to hush it, whispering softly, "It's all right, you're safe." But even as he spoke, he knew that wasn't true. A flash of lightning tore the night open, and in that moment, he saw her, standing at the edge of the clearing, massive, soaked to the bone, her fur dark and matted, her amber eyes glistening with a sorrow that stopped him cold. She looked straight at him, then at the bundle in his arms. The storm seemed to fade. Time froze. No growl, no attack, just a silence so heavy it felt alive. The creature stepped closer, trembling, her gaze fixed on the child she'd lost, and then Samuel understood. They weren't hunters. They weren't monsters. They were a family, searching through the storm for the one thing the wild had taken from them. Samuel stood by the window, heart pounding as the storm raged outside. The figures were still there, moving in the shadows, circling, waiting. He could feel their presence as surely as the cold that seeped through the cabin walls. Willow's cries had turned from fear to something deeper, something aching and familiar. It wasn't calling for safety anymore. It was calling for home. Samuel looked down at the trembling creature in his arms, then back toward the shapes shifting beyond the rain. He knew what he had to do. He unlatched the door. The wind hit him, like a wave cold and wild carrying the smell of pine and earth. For a long moment he just stood there on the porch, coat soaked through, the little one clinging to him. Then, step by slow step, he walked out into the storm. Lightning flashed. For a heartbeat, the clearing lit up, revealing them all. The tribe stood still among the trees, massive and silent, their fur glistening in the downpour. They were majestic, powerful, but not threatening. They watched him with something that looked almost human, a cautious, aching hope. Samuel stopped a few feet from the largest figure, the mother, Her chest heaved, her eyes locked on the small bundle he held. When she stepped forward, she let out a low, trembling sound that rose above the wind, half grief, half relief. It shook Samuel to his core. He looked down at Willow. The tiny hands reached outward, fingers stretching toward the sound. Samuel's throat tightened. Slowly he whispered, "Go home." The mother closed the distance, her movement careful, reverent. She took the child from his arms, holding it close against her chest. Willow buried its face in her fur with a faint whimpering sigh. For a single endless moment she met Samuel's eyes. No words passed between them, only the quiet understanding of two souls who had both loved and lost. Then the thunder rolled again, and with it, the tribe turned. In the flicker of the next lightning strike, they were gone, melting back into the forest like ghosts returning to the earth. Samuel stood alone in the rain, heart torn open, yet strangely at peace. The storm raged on, but inside him something finally stilled. When morning came, the storm was gone. The sky hung low and gray, and the forest lay still and too still. Not a sound stirred among the trees. Not a footprint marked the mud outside the cabin. Only broken branches and trampled grass remained, faint traces of what had passed through in the night. Samuel stepped out slowly, every part of him heavy with the kind of silence that follows something sacred. The air smelled of wet pine and ash. He walked down to the creek where the water ran cold and clear again, the world washed clean as if nothing had ever happened. But he knew better. Some moments don't leave marks in the dirt. They leave them in the soul. By the roots of the old willow tree, he knelt and set down a small carved wooden toy, the one Willow had held in its tiny hands, tracing its shape with curiosity. He placed it gently among the stones, whispering a quiet goodbye. Weeks passed. The forest returned to its rhythm, the calls of birds, the hum of insects, the wind through pine. Life went on. Yet one morning, while walking the same path, Samuel stopped by the creek and saw that the toy was gone. In its place lay a small bundle of fresh wildflowers, bound together with reeds, turned carefully, intentionally. He stood there for a long time, the corners of his mouth lifting in a quiet, knowing smile. The forest, it seemed, had its own way of saying thank you. As the breeze moved through the trees, he whispered softly, "You're welcome," and turned back toward his cabin, the echo of that night still living somewhere deep in his heart. Samuel sat on the porch as the evening light slipped behind the ridges, painting the sky in shades of gold and gray. The forest stretched before him, a calm, endless, alive. He could still hear the river down below, whispering softly through the stones. He took a slow breath and spoke as if to the wind itself. "People think the woods are full of monsters," he said quietly, "but I've walked them my whole life, and I've learned something different. The wild isn't cruel. It just holds on to love longer than we do." He leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him, eyes tracing the line of trees swaying gently in the fading light. Somewhere out there, he knew, that family still moved through the valleys and hidden, cautious, but together again. And that was enough. The years had taken much from him, but that night had given something back, a kind of peace no man could buy or understand unless he'd seen it himself. As the last of the daylight faded, Samuel whispered one final thought, soft as a prayer. "They came for their child," he said, eyes glistening, "and left a piece of peace behind.